The door was already open when the men came with the stamped paper, but it felt like a gate slammed shut. Miriam had set a kettle on the brazier and was counting her children's breaths as they woke to the dust-milk light of the courtyard, the cracked basin, the pomegranate tree that insisted on blooming despite Harmattan. Her eldest, Isa, traced his finger along the wall where his father's height marks climbed in pencil until they stopped. The men did not look at the tree or the marks or the kettle. They held up a blue folder with the crest of the municipal registry and the faint smell of ink and sweat, the smell of something decided far from breath and boiling water. The notice said the house had been sold, the buyer had a seal, and the seal was a door that only opened one way. Across the lane, people drifted to their entrances as birds do when a hawk passes. The neighbor, old Lala with her cane, called out in Mori that there must be a mistake. This house belonged to Miriam's late father, and the family held a simple handwritten deed, folded into a leather pouch that had traveled back and forth to Friday prayers for 30 years. The men's answer was a glove on a latch, a signature registered last month, a receipt for a facilitation fee, and a land book entry in fat black pen recording a new owner whose name none of them recognized. The paper was a kind of wind. It blew across pots and school bags and the ridge of the doorframe where, every night, Miriam hung a rosary. It would be told later, by the woman who sells oranges near the bus stop, by the tailor who hems uniforms near the lice-plagued primary school, that the Betrayal walked into the courtyard wearing familiar shoes. The new owner was not a stranger. It was Arauna, the younger brother of Miriam's late husband, who had collected condolence envelopes with both hands when the body was carried home, who had promised to watch over the children like a gate left on the latch. He stood behind the municipal men now, eyes steady, a new shirt starched within an inch of pride. He had found a buyer in the night market of favors, moved the file along with bills folded under tea glasses, and convinced a registrar that a dead man had wished it so. The first wound was not the paper. It was the breath it stole from Miriam's chest. She reached for the pouch in the calabash, where she kept her father's deed, and when she opened it, the leather creaked like a door begging to be repaired. The paper inside was brittle but legible, a careful calligraphy of a neighborhood elder long ago, witnessed by two men whose names matched the worn knuckles running a prayer board in the mosque. The municipal men held it with two fingers as if it might stain them, then set it aside on the ledge where Isa's toy truck parked every night. The official with the stamp, the obstructive one, the kind of man who keeps a spare pad of ink in his breast pocket as if it's a heart, said the old deed had no force. The new one had a number. The number, he explained, was a pass through the gate. A small crowd rippled into argument. In disputes, people reach for objects. Lala's cane ticked the tiled floor. A young mason wiped gypsum dust on his jeans and offered to call his cousin in enforcement. A cousin, a gate, a quick handling. The official's smile wasn't unkind, which was worse. He asked for calm. He invited them to the registry to clarify matters, a bland verb that eats days. He glanced at his watch with the lion on the face and said that if they did not leave willingly, the buyer could ask the court's bailiff to lock the door. Later, after the children had been sent to school empty and the kettle had cooled and the men had gone, Miriam sat on the low stool and placed the leather pouch on her lap like a child. She exhaled. The breath came back ragged. She took a charcoal stub and wrote the date on the wall beneath the last height mark. It steadied her hand to drag straight lines. Then she took out her phone, cracked at the corner, and opened the green icon that everyone uses because it does not judge. She typed a message in the community group. The registry says, "My house is not mine." My brother-in-law says he has papers. If anyone knows what to do, answer before the gate closes. She added a voice note because that's how people hear truth. They hear the breath between words. Before midday, the rumor itself had a pulse. In the market, a woman buying okra shook her head and said she had heard of 3 cases like this, and the gatekeepers in the registry wore new watches, while tiny children learned subtraction under tarps. At the roadside, a motorbike taxi hummed past, and the driver shouted that the new way to steal was to stamp. It was an injustice, small enough to hide in a ledger, and large enough to split a family. And before dusk brought the moths, someone forwarded Miriam's voice note to a contact in a different channel, the one where messages were read by a young aide with a white shirt and a tired face, seated outside a door with no nameplate. The door everyone in the city now called the breath door. That aide listened to the rasp on Miriam's message and walked it through that door. The registry was a building with 24 doors and no windows you could open. It wore its authority in flaking paint, Ministry of Lands and Habitation, gold letters peeling like old scabs. A morning line curled past the guard booth where a bucket of sand served as ashtray and fire plan. The guard, who had a kind eye and a notebook full of license plates, waved people in with the weary benevolence of someone who knows the gate is not his. Inside, a wall of blue ledgers leaned toward collapse. Each ledger had a spine inked with dates and codes. They looked like bound rivers, slow and silted. A sign warned against brokers, and a broker stood beneath it, adjusting his cap and his prices. Miriam arrived clutching the leather pouch that had outlived her father and first child. With her came Lala, her cane tapping out the meter of resolve, and the courageous insider whom they did not yet know, a clerk named Awa, who moved briskly between desks like a nurse in a busy ward. Awa saw the pouch, the way fingers tighten around proof, and something in her training quickened. She set a glass of water on the counter before anyone asked. Breath before billing, water before paperwork. She asked for the case number. There was no case number, only a notice, delivered without docket. She asked for the new deed. The obstructive official, the same lion watchman from the courtyard, produced a copy with a flourish meant to frighten. The paper bore a registrar's signature that bled slightly in the fibers, a money smell. Awa didn't touch the edges. She read the dates. She checked the book number and page number and saw that they were plausible. Plausible is how bad things walk upright. She asked who had filed the sale. The answer arrived before the words. A young broker lifted his chin, small triumph, like a man pointing at a door he had learned to open with a bent key. He offered help. He offered a quick reversal for a fee. He spoke softly. The language of suffering turned profitable. Behind him, taped to a pillar, a photocopied circular from the ministry forbade exactly this. The circular was sun-faded. The broker was not. By noon, the case had swollen to fill the corridor. Arana appeared in a white boo-boo, the fabric gleaming in a way that didn't quite belong to him. He had brought 2 cousins whose job was to nod. He said that, as the surviving brother, he had a right to manage family property and relieve debts, words he had harvested from someone's mouth at the tea stand near the courthouse. He called Miriam ungrateful, in a voice calibrated to be heard by strangers. When she raised the leather pouch, he called it old paper, and old paper was his fuse. The obstructive official, acting as if he were a judge and not a man at a desk, said the matter was already recorded and, like a door with a chain, that suggested finality. News moves faster than files. That afternoon, the community voice, a radio presenter named Toussaint, whose show had taught the city to pronounce its own grievances clearly, invited listeners to speak about land papers. He read anonymous messages about requested tea, about files that vanished and reappeared in different hands, about a woman who slept with her children on a veranda while her dossier wandered, stamped and unstamped, through rooms where doors closed softly. He told them not to name names. He asked them to name patterns. In the ledger of the airwaves, a pattern wrote itself. On WhatsApp, Awa wrote to a friend in another ministry, "When the paper has numbers but not truth, where do we go?" The friend sent back a single number she had never used before and a caution. If you message that number, a door will open and men with quiet shoes will walk through it. Awa looked at the line of people and the broker beneath the sign and the lion watchman adjusting his stamp pad, and she sent the message. She wrote only the facts. The old deed in a leather pouch, the new deed with a smell, the dates, the cousin with nods, the broker beneath the sign. A minute later, her phone pinged. "Thank you. Please assemble copies. Hold the file until a team arrives. Do not obstruct. Do not ally. We are on our way." They did not arrive with sirens. They arrived with clipboards. At 4 p.m, the corridor stiffened when a 3-person team in plain shirts walked in, accompanied by the truth-telling aide from the door with no nameplate. He introduced himself without title and asked to see the new deed. He asked gently, as if requesting permission to hold a child, for the ledger volume. He wore no lion on his watch. He took breath between questions. When the obstructive official hesitated, the guard with the good notebook closed the gate for the first time that day. People in the line sat on the benches and waited, grateful to wait for once because the wait felt like a door opening. Outside, the sky threw iron light into the street. Arana's cousins checked their phones suddenly and discovered reasons to leave. The broker found his cap very interesting. The legal words, heavy as coins, lost their shine. The aide drew a thin computer from a bag and opened a secure registry mirror, a pilot database no one in the public had seen. He found the page numbers. He found the timestamps. He found what was missing, which had the shape of a breath held too long, a required notification to heirs, a signed waiver from the widow, a meeting minute from the neighborhood council witnessing the transfer. The line of absence ran like a crack through the file. He closed the computer and asked for an office with a door. The obstructive official rose slowly. His stamp pad left a blue ink halo on the desk that would not wash out for days. He led them to a small room where a louver window opened grudgingly. On the wall, A calendar advertisement for cement showed a bridge promising to hold. The aide placed the new deed on the desk, then placed beside it a typed sheet bearing the leader's provisional directive from the month before, something timid and temporary aimed at stopping the hemorrhage while a bolder reform was drafted. No household shall be removed from a primary residence without a witnessed heir's declaration and an independent verification call to the listed widow or widower. He tapped the rule. He looked at the man. He did not raise his voice. He said, "This door will not close today." When Ibrahim arrived, it was without flourish, like rain that realizes its business is not noise but water. He entered by the side gate most officials ignored because the tree's roots had cracked the paving there, and he stopped only to lift the branch away from a child's bicycle. He was not the president and not a minister. He was the artery between the two, the one they called the leader if they could not pronounce his title exactly. What shocked people was never his rank. It was his sequence. He ordered care before paperwork, breath before billing, roofs before receipts. People said he moved through rooms like someone counting the breaths in them. He found Miriam in the corridor with her leather pouch open on her lap. He asked to see the old deed and read it as if it were a letter from a relative. He asked for ICE's names and each child's age. He looked at the obstructive official and saw a man guarding a bridge made of receipts. He asked the clerk, Awa, how many similar cases had crossed her desk since New Year. She did not guess. She opened her phone and scrolled through photographs of ledger pages she had taken to protect herself, columns of names, annotations in faint pencil, a trail of urgent notes that always meant someone's hand had warmed the file. A ledger is a door. Once you see the hinges, you cannot pretend it is a wall. He asked to see the broker, who stood beneath the warning sign as if it were a parasol. The man lifted his shoulders and gave the practiced speech of a man who thinks he is merely wind. He helps people navigate complexity. He helps the poor understand forms. He helps the registry, which is overworked. The speech had the smoothness of a spoon worn by the same cup. Ibrahim listened, and then asked 2 questions. Who pays you? Who is paid when you are paid? The broker's answers were both slippery and exact. Slippery because many people paid him, exact because the same 2 names repeated on the back-channel receipts he scribbled in a square notebook. He had been very diligent about his own records. People who live at gates often are. The room with the louver window was cooler. Ibrahim asked the obstructive official to sit. He placed a small recorder on the desk that clicked once and then fell silent. He referred to the provisional directive the aide had placed on the table. He asked whether the office had implemented it. The answer came in the grammar of avoidance. We received many directives. We are reorganizing. The team size is limited. He did not snap. He asked to see the office's implementation log. There was none. He asked to see the notification calls to widows in the last 30 days. Awa, cheek steady, said there had been 7 calls out of 41 cases. She kept score because keeping score had become a kind of breathing. Made a decision in the same posture he had used when he'd lifted the branch from the bicycle. Quiet, inevitable, he declared a halt on all primary residence transfers, citywide, pending independent revalidation. He ordered that Miriam's family not be disturbed, not today, not later, until a witnessed heirs council met in the courtyard and signed with time and video and a neighborhood stamp. He extended the halt to cases that looked like hers, last-minute sales after funerals, filings under siblings' names, transfers executed without a council minute. He did not ask the obstructive official to agree. He handed him the order and asked him to carry it like a child you do not drop. In the corridor, a murmur rose. People live long on very little. It is rules that take their breath. When rules change in their favor, the heir learns to stand up. The guard by the gate stepped back from his stool, as if he had felt a small wind shift. The broker pretended to study the cracks in the floor. The truth-telling aide moved along the bench and explained the halt to each person, his pen making a line across their forms where a denial would have gone. Awa set up a table with 3 chairs and wrote on a scrap of cardboard, Heir's verification desk. She drew 2 boxes, old paper and new paper. The boxes looked like little doors. He stayed longer than his calendar could afford. He asked for tea and shared it with the guard and with a woman whose sister had been told that a stamp had more right to a bed than a baby. He dialed a number in the Ministry of Finance and told them that facilitation fees had become a line item in people's grief. And while the building whispered around him, he instructed that the registry's own fee structure be paused for primary residence cases until a cleaner path could be announced. He did not give a speech. He put the recorder away. He asked Awa to meet him the next morning with her photographs and her memory. Friday, he said, will be for ledger work. Thursday will be for breath. As he left, He stopped in the doorway and looked back at the blue ledgers leaning like tired men. On the spine of one, he noticed a child's doodle of a door, a rectangle with 2 eyes. He smiled because even children understand that doors are watching. He made a note to himself, one of those notes aides find later in the margins. Doors as metrics. The halt did not shock those who had hoped for it. What shocked them was the way it was made real in the hours that followed. The lion watchman instructing his clerk to call widows instead of brokers, the guard closing the gate, not to keep out the weak, but to reorganize the queue. The broker, for the first time, backing away from a family he could not press with urgency. By night, a photograph from the registry corridor slid across phones, a cardboard sign, 2 boxes, a woman in a headscarf holding 2 kinds of paper. The caption said only, "Door stays open." Friday smelled of paper and electric dust. Before dawn, the truth-telling aide had set up a folding table in the conference room beneath a fan that clicked with a rhythm that became the room's patience. On the table lay things the public never sees: a thin laptop connected to a read-only mirror of the registry database, a box of ink pads in red and blue, a stack of standard forms, a camera no larger than a key, a printed list of 41 cases matching Miriam's pattern. The list was the morning's map. The map was a ledger. The ledger was a door. Awa arrived with her phone and a small notebook whose cover had become slick from being slipped in and out of a pocket. She had numbered the photographs and annotated them with times and nicknames because names float in places like these. The obstructive official arrived as well, tight-lipped and sat as instructed. The guard's notebook of license plates lay nearby. It would prove important in a way no one expected, a ledger at the gate that suddenly spoke. Ibrahim came last, without entourage, and placed 4 objects on the table: a copy of the provisional directive, a list of registry officers' official phones, the certificates for the registry's stamp seals, and a stopwatch. The exposure was not theatrical. They picked up 1 case and followed it. A transfer executed 2 days after a burial. Missing heir's declaration. A council minute that, when Awa called the chair, he denied signing. His voice on speaker carried the low-grade fury of an honest man used as ink. The license plate log showed the same broker's motorbike arriving on each day a witness had supposedly appeared. The stamp seal certificate numbers did not match the imprint on the deed. The lion watchman's hand trembled when he saw it because forgery is louder in the wrist than in the mouth. The stopwatch told a story of speed where there should have been pause. Paper stamped within 12 minutes of submission. A pace that only a gate accustomed to a private door can achieve. They did not name villains beyond necessity. They named mechanics. The perverse incentive was easy enough to describe, once one admitted to seeing it: fees tied to volume rather than verification, end-of-month targets that defined success as stamps applied, informal tea to accelerate files, brokers hired as translators of fear. The system had become a market where the most liquid currency was grief's urge to finish. In that market, brothers sold houses to balance a ledger of debts no one else had seen. In that market, the clerk who paused for breath was told she wanted bribes. In that market, the Community Voices inbox filled each morning with messages that all began the same. Please, before the gate closes. They audited 10 cases before lunch. 4 had clean paths, and Ibrahim asked that those be moved forward with apology for delay. The rest were sent into a new file. Contested, halt enforced, heirs counsel required. He ordered that each of those families be visited at home by a team of 3 on Saturday, and that a video record be made of the council signatures. He instructed that lists of required documents be written in plain language and posted outside the gate and on the ministry's Telegram channel, where rumors go to turn into facts. He asked the guard to record not only plates, but the arrival and departure times of brokers, who declared themselves helpers, because sometimes the truth of a door is told by the shoes that pass through it, the afternoon brought, what people later called the page. It was a single page pinned behind glass in the registry's lobby by Awa's careful hands. It said in black type, primary residence transfers, audit status. Beneath it, 3 lines: door to help, minutes, targets convened, denials reversed, last 24-inch. Complaints resolved, SLA 72-inch. The numbers started humble, 22, 3, 0, but they were numbers the city could point at, the way a mother points at a fever that breaks. The truth-telling aide snapped a photograph of the board, and within an hour it had escaped the building and gone everywhere. Screens lit with it like votive candles. Exposure is both method and mercy. They interviewed the obstructive official in a manner that recognized his humanity while naming his gatekeeping. He spoke of workload and confusion. They showed him his stamp's certificate number and the mismatched imprint. He spoke of pressure. They showed him the broker's notebook where his name appeared beside amounts that corresponded too neatly to the registry's unofficial cadence. He asked for water. Ibrahim poured it himself and set it on the table with the simple instruction of a father teaching a boy to carry responsibility. "Please drink, then tell us the part we cannot see," he told them. He named the deputy who had created an end-of-month bonus pool drawn from acceleration fees, an idiom for bribes that had been laundered into semantics. He named the two brokers with whom they coordinated heavy days. He named a judge's clerk who, for a percentage, guaranteed that injunctions would not be signed on Fridays. He looked at the door while he spoke, and it seemed to the young aide that the man feared the door more than the people in the room, because the door is where he had become this person. They did not arrest him that afternoon. They did something harder. They asked him to carry the audit notices to the deputy himself, and witness the deputy's face when he read the leader's signature. They sent the guard with him. The guard's notebook wrote in his pocket like a small law. In another room, Awa called Miriam to say that her house would not be touched, that the halt covered her door, that an elders' council would meet on Sunday under the pomegranate and write its minute in ink that would dry in front of everyone. Miriam exhaled, and in that breath was the distance between a stamp and a prayer. At sunset, the radio presenter Toussaint read the numbers from the board as if they were football scores. He avoided names. He named the door. He said a new thing had appeared in the city. A way to measure whether a gate had remembered it was built for passage, not profit. He repeated the 3 lines until the evening prayer rose and braided around them. That night, a quiet message arrived on the broker's phone from a number he had saved as Judge Clerk. It said only, "Doors are different now." On Monday, Ibrahim stood in the courtyard under the pomegranate. It was not a ceremony. It was a bench and a plastic table and a thermos of mint tea and a circle of people who needed the door to tell the truth. The neighborhood's council of elders gathered with stamps and a battered ledger more honest than the blue volumes downtown. The courageous insider Awa read the names of the heirs slowly and then recorded in a clear hand the council's decision. The house remains the primary residence of Miriam and her children until Isa reaches 21. Any sale must be approved by a meeting like this and witnessed by 2 unrelated households. The truth-telling aide filmed the signatures with his small camera. The ink caught the sun and dried. The obstructive official was present with his mouth closed and his eyes open. The broker was not invited. They did not chase him away. They did not invite him in. Reform, Ibrahim wrote later, must be embarrassingly simple to survive. At the registry, he announced the first roof protocol, and people who had loved the phrase breath before billing recognized its sibling. The rule was 7 words: shelter first, dispute later, receipts follow truth. It came with teeth. Primary residence cases would not be stamped until a verified heirs council minute and an independent verification call to the listed widow or widower had been recorded. Fees were decoupled from volume. Bonuses were tied to accuracy and door-to-help time. Brokers could no longer stand beneath the sign warning against them. The sign itself was replaced with a desk, staffed by rotating clerks, who explained forms without asking for a coin. The lion watchman lost his lion. He was moved to archives with a salary and no stamp until a review panel could decide his longer fate. The board behind glass evolved. The numbers updated at noon and close. The 3 lines stayed, and 2 more were added in thin print for those who like to read to the middle. Heirs calls completed, last 7 days, and mirror match rate, registry versus community minute. The mirror was the small database that the aide had showed that afternoon. It now reflected every primary residence transfer with a public hash the community voice could read on air without fear. The complaint channel was a number that fit into memory easily, with a pledge in writing hinged beside it. SLA 72 hours, or the case escalates by rule, not favor. Complaints were no longer swallowed by a corridor. They were chewed and moved along by a clock. The perverse incentive was banned not with banners, but with arithmetic. End-of-month stamp targets were retired. A new funding path carried basic operating costs from the ministry to the registry without docking for low volume. When you stop paying people to close doors, doors remember the apocalypse they were designed to resist. Training did not happen in a hotel. It happened at the gate. Awa led the drill while a line waited and watched. It had 5 steps, chanted sotto voce like prayer: greet, check ID, copy heirs, minute, place call, log time. In the drill, clerks practiced saying no to brokers and yes to widows. In the drill, the guard practiced writing the time when a door opened and when it closed. The embarrassment was intentional. Systems learn humility by being seen learning. Enforcement mattered because memory is a muscle that atrophies. The deputy who had invented the bonus pool was asked to explain the logic of a gate that prizes speed over breath at a public hearing in a room without carpets. The judge's clerk was referred to an ethics panel whose lights had been dim for too long. They were turned on. 2 brokers accepted the new desk's wage and training. 1 left town, which is a kind of confession made with shoes. The obstructive official submitted a statement that named his own fear, and the culture permit extended. Men who admit to the logic they have lived under are more salvageable than men who inflate their courage after the fact. Miriam's door received a new latch that did not stick. A metal plate with a small emblem, House verified, council minute on file, was affixed above the door frame where the rosary hung. It was not a blessing and not a target. It was a sign to those who trade in fear that this door had entered a different economy. Even Arauna came, eyes smaller than pride, to sit under the pomegranate and drink tea with Issa. He did not apologize in so many words. He brought notebooks for school and registered his own regret with the council, which recorded it in its ledger. Regret has its line. It is not the last line. At the gate, the guard wrote down 3 arrivals and 2 departures, and shook his head at the way time now behaved. He told the radio presenter that his job had become interesting in a different direction. He kept a coin in his pocket he no longer needed to offer to move a file. He kept a whistle he no longer needed to blow. He understood that the door needed tending like a brazier, not fighting like a thief. He developed, without meaning to, a habit of saying the protocol aloud when no one could hear him. Shelter first, dispute later, receipts follow truth. He did not do this because it was required. He did it because the words changed the way the latch felt in his hand. Systems don't end, they exhale. Months later, the board behind glass had so few surprises that people stopped photographing it. Door to help settled at 12 minutes, give or take a lunch. Denials reversed in the last 24 hours hovered at 0 and sometimes 1 when an old case unclogged. Complaints resolved within 72 hours held steady at 98%. The numbers lost their drama. They became the boredom of safety. The guard's notebook of license plates filled and was replaced with another, but now the pages smelled only of dust and pencil, not the anxiety of being a witness to quiet theft. The habit spread. At the birth registry, a midwife taped a handwritten rule above the window where mothers waited with babies wrapped in animal print fleece. Name first, fee later. At the school bursar's office, a clerk took a piece of cardboard and made a rectangle at the top like a small door and wrote beneath it, "Uniforms issued, IOUs forgiven in rainy season." The water utility, never wanting to be last to a party once the music begins to pay its own bills, launched a dashboard whose 3rd line read, "Disconnections prevented due to medical need." The city learned to rehearse kindness until it felt like homework done on time. On the radio, Toussaint's show grew quieter, which he took as a sign of health. He read the board numbers twice instead of 6 times. He told a story once a week instead of every morning. He brought on a clerk from the registry who had never spoken publicly before and let her describe the 5-step drill. He brought on an elder who held up the neighborhood ledger and argued good-naturedly that his book was still the master of truth. He brought on Miriam, who came reluctantly and spoke about the first night she slept without hearing paper in the dark. She said she no longer counted her children's breaths to make sure they were still there. She counted the pencil marks on the wall because the 2 youngest had grown. Arauna found work at a garage far from the registry. Every evening he washed his hands with a brush and a bar of soap until the oil and the past learned to live on different skin. He came on Fridays to the courtyard and sat on a stone and watched Isa solve algebra with a finger on a slate. He learned to stay past his shame. At sunset, he helped Lala with her cane up the step because age is a ledger that cannot be tricked. In time, people told the story of his betrayal in a way that did not flatten him into villainy. They said the system had taught him to see doors as chances to balance debts. They said the system had been retrained, and with it, his life. Awa accepted a promotion she had not sought. Training lead, first roof protocol. She carried a laminated checklist that had softened at the edges from handling. She visited gates in other districts where the air still argued with itself. And she stood beside guards and clerks and tried to make boredom attractive. She taught them to love the sound a stamp makes when it rests instead of strikes. She kept a picture of the board's first day in her bag to remind herself that metrics are not a wall you nail up once. They are a door you oil. Ibrahim refused the word hero when it curled around his name like a ribbon. He scheduled the dull meetings that keep culture from decaying. Monthly audits where the truth-telling aide presented mirror match rates. Quarterly prosecutions that taught memory that it has teeth. Surprise visits where he asked the guard to recite the protocol and smiled when the guard did so without flourish. He kept the recorder in his pocket and almost never used it. He preferred to measure the pause before an answer, The way a man looks at a door before he opens it. On a day without weather, the little emblem above Miriam's door caught the light and tossed it to the pomegranate leaves. She took the leather pouch from the shelf and showed it to Isa, not because she feared she would need it, but because objects whistle differently when you stop teaching them to prove. The pouch smelled of the past and of mint tea spilled on a day when a council signed. She returned it to its place and closed the cupboard softly, a good latch. She stirred the kettle and called to the children. She drew a new pencil mark on the wall, and the sound it made, graphite on paint, was a kind of fever data the old world never bothered to record. At the registry, the blue ledgers still leaned like tired men, but new shelves had been built and the worst of the tilt corrected. A small plaque hung behind glass beside the board. It did not praise anyone. It repeated 7 words. Shelter first, dispute later, receipts follow truth. The doors remembered, as doors do when someone oils the hinges and turns the handle with care, that they were made not to trap breath, but to let it pass. And if people forgot, which is what people do, there were numbers to remind them and a guard at the gate who would point at the board and say, "With the calm boredom of good systems, we are on time." As always, thank you for spending your time with us. If the story moved you or made you think about the gates in your own world, stay with this community so we can keep opening doors together. And hey, if you liked the video, then like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most.